Barefoot and 9 months pregnant, I stood at the altar while my fiancé's mother grabbed the microphone. No son of mine marries charity. 67 relatives watched. I touched my bump and nodded. Then his commanding general stood up, cleared his throat, and said, "Ma'am, do you know her net?" The microphone squealed when she grabbed it. That high-pitched feedback whine cut through the string quartet, through the murmur of 67 guests shifting in their wooden pews, through the floral arrangements and the candlelight and everything else that was supposed to make this afternoon feel sacred. Dolores Whitfield had both hands wrapped around the mic stand like she was strangling it, her silk mother-of-the-groom dress bunching at the shoulders as she wrestled it from the confused officiant. I was standing at the altar, barefoot, 9 months pregnant, 31 years old, wearing a dress I'd had altered 3 times over the past 8 weeks because the baby kept growing and the seamstress kept sighing. My feet were swollen enough that I'd kick my heels off during the processional and just walk the last 40 feet on cool tile. Nobody said anything. A few people smiled. My maid of honor, Ricky, whispered "Queen, move" as I passed her, and now Dolores had the microphone. "I need to say something," she announced like she was calling a board meeting to order. Her voice was shaking, but her jaw was set, and I knew, the way you know a storm is coming, not because of thunder but because of silence, that this was the thing she'd been building toward for months. They'd been pushing like this for a while. Dolores and her husband Frank had spent the better part of a year making sure I understood exactly what they thought of me. Small things at first. Dolores forgetting to set a place for me at Thanksgiving. Frank asking Garrett in front of me if he'd considered a prenup, just to be responsible. The baby shower Dolores threw that was actually a brunch for her garden club friends, where she introduced me to everyone as the girl Garrett's been seeing. We'd been together 4 years. I was 7 months pregnant at that brunch, wearing an engagement ring. But I'd handled all of it the way I handle most things, quietly, strategically, and with the understanding that people reveal themselves on a long enough timeline. I didn't fight, I didn't complain to Garrett. I documented, I observed, I waited, and now Dolores was standing 6 feet from me at my own wedding, in front of every person we knew, with a microphone. "No son of mine," she said, her voice cracking into that particular register of theatrical anguish, "marries charity." The word landed like a slap. Charity. Not a name, a diagnosis, a classification. She was telling 67 people, my family, Garrett's family, our friends, colleagues, the officiant, the caterer standing in the doorway with a tray of champagne flutes, that I was a project, a rescue mission, that Garrett had found me in some gutter and was elevating me out of pity or obligation. The chapel went dead quiet. Not polite quiet, shocked quiet, the kind where you can hear someone's watch ticking 4 rows back. Garrett was next to me. I felt him stiffen, felt his hand start to pull away from mine like he was going to step forward, say something, fix it the way he always tried to fix his mother's messes, with deflection and damage control and a tight smile. I squeezed his hand once, held it, then I touched my bump. My daughter was doing that thing she'd been doing all week, pressing her foot against my right side like she was trying to kick her way out early. I felt it, that little push, and I nodded. Not at Dolores, not at Garrett, not at anyone in particular. I nodded the way you nod when the last piece of a puzzle slides into place and the picture is exactly what you expected. Because 3 rows back on the left side of the chapel, a 71-year-old man in a dress uniform was already rising to his feet. Major General Callum Breedlove, United States Army, retired, 3 stars, 38 years of service, 2 combat deployments, former commander of the 82nd Airborne Division, current chairman of the Breedlove Family Trust, which held, among other things, controlling interest in Breedlove Defense Solutions, a private military consulting firm with annual revenues just north of $900 million. He was also my godfather, had been since the day I was born. My father, Colonel Warren Ashby, served under him in the Gulf. They were brothers in everything but blood. When my parents died in a car accident outside Fort Bragg when I was 11, Callum and his wife Lenora took me in, raised me, put me through Vanderbilt, walked me through the doors of my first internship at a logistics firm that eventually became the company I now owned. Dolores didn't know any of this. She hadn't asked. In 18 months of knowing me, 18 months of snide remarks and cold shoulders and performative concern about whether Garrett was thinking clearly, she had never once asked me what I did for a living, where I went to school, who my family was. She'd decided what I was the first time she saw me, and everything after that was just confirmation. General Breedlove cleared his throat. It was the kind of throat clear that had silenced rooms full of colonels. the kind that made lieutenant generals sit up straighter. In a chapel in Savannah on a Saturday afternoon, it had the effect of a gunshot. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carried without effort, deep, southern, unhurried. He didn't need a microphone. He'd spent 4 decades projecting authority across runways and briefing rooms and open desert. "Do you know who she is?" Dolores turned. She was still holding the microphone. Her mouth was open slightly, the way people's mouths open when they've been interrupted mid-performance and don't know how to recalibrate. "Excuse me?" she said. Simple question. Breedlove stepped into the center aisle. He was wearing his Class A uniform. Every ribbon, every medal, the stars on his shoulders caught the light from the stained glass windows and threw tiny reflections across the ceiling. "You just called that woman Charity, so I'm asking, respectfully, if you have any idea who she is." "I know exactly who she is," Dolores snapped. "She's a girl who showed up out of nowhere, got pregnant, and now my son feels obligated to—" "Let me stop you there." Breedlove raised one hand, just one, palm out. The gesture was so controlled, so practiced, that Dolores actually stopped talking. "I'm going to tell you something, and I'd like you to listen carefully, because I'm only going to say it once." The chapel was frozen. 67 people. Not a sound. "That woman standing at your son's altar," Breedlove said, nodding toward me, "is Margot Ashby. She is the daughter of Colonel Warren Ashby, who served this country for 22 years and gave his life, not in combat but driving home from the base at 0300 after working a 36-hour rotation because people like him don't stop. She is the goddaughter of a 3-star general. She graduated summa cum laude from Vanderbilt University. She holds an MBA from Wharton. She is the founder and sole owner of Ashby Strategic Logistics, which was awarded a Department of Defense contract last fiscal year worth more money than I suspect you've seen in your entire life." He paused. "Let that sit." "She is also," he continued, "the beneficiary of the Breedlove Family Trust, which, and I share this not to boast but to clarify since clarity seems to be in short supply today, currently holds assets valued at just over $400 million. Someone in the fourth row made a sound. I think it was Garrett's Aunt Patricia, a kind of strangled inhale that she tried to disguise as a cough. Dolores's face went through about 6 expressions in 3 seconds. Confusion, calculation, fear, denial. Then something I'd seen before on people who realize they've made a catastrophic, irreversible error in front of witnesses, a kind of blank, frozen panic. "That baby," Breedlove said, gesturing toward my belly, "is going to be the most protected, most provided for child in this state. Not because of your son, who seems like a fine young man, but because that child's mother built something from nothing after losing both parents at 11 years old. She didn't ask for help. She didn't ask for sympathy. She certainly didn't ask for your approval." Breedlove took one more step forward. He was now about 10 feet from Dolores. "So when you stand at her wedding, the wedding she paid for, by the way, which I'm guessing you also didn't know, and you call her Charity?" He shook his head slowly. "Ma'am, you're not just wrong. You're embarrassing yourself in front of people who know better." He turned to me. "Margot, sweetheart, I apologize for the interruption. Please continue your wedding." Then he sat down. Lenora, sitting beside him, patted his knee once and didn't say a word. The silence lasted about 4 seconds. It felt like 40. Dolores was still standing there. The microphone was still in her hand, but the energy had drained out of her so completely that she looked like a puppet with cut strings. Her husband, Frank, sitting in the front row, had his head in his hands. I looked at Garrett. Here's the thing about Garrett. He's a good man, a genuinely good man. He's a captain in the army. That's how we met, at a military gala that Breedlove had dragged me to 3 years earlier. Garrett had been raised by Dolores and Frank, which meant he'd been raised with money, social ambition, and the understanding that everything was a transaction. But somewhere in there, despite all of it, he'd turned out decent, honest, kind in the ways that matter. He'd known who I was, all of it, the trust, the company, the general, since our second date, and he'd never once treated me differently because of it. He told his parents almost nothing about my background because, as he put it, they'll make it about them. He was right. I squeezed his hand again. He looked at me, and I could see it, the mortification, the anger, the apology he was trying to form. "It's fine," I said. "Quiet, just for him. We knew this was coming, because we did." Garrett had warned me 3 weeks before the wedding that Dolores had been making noise about speaking up at the ceremony. He told her not to. She told him she had a mother's duty. He'd called Breedlove that same night, and the general had said in that gravel road voice of his, "Let her, I'll handle it." And he had. I turned to the officiant, Reverend Tate, who was standing to the side looking like a man who'd just watched a building collapse and was trying to remember if he'd left anything inside. "Reverend," I said, "whenever you're ready." He blinked. We're continuing?" "We are." He looked at Dolores, who was now being guided back to her seat by Frank, who had finally gotten out of his chair and was pulling the microphone from her hand with the gentle urgency of someone defusing a bomb. Dolores went. She sat. She didn't look at anyone. Reverend Tate straightened his stole, opened his book, and cleared his throat. "Dearly beloved," he said, "we are gathered here today." And the wedding continued, just like that, as if Dolores's little performance had been an intermission nobody asked for. Dolores didn't know, couldn't have known, because she never bothered to learn anything about me. The wedding was just the beginning. The reception was at a venue I'd rented on the river, a restored cotton warehouse with 20-foot ceilings and exposed brick, and a caterer I'd flown in from Charleston because Garrett loved low-country food and I wanted him to have it. The whole thing was mine. I'd planned it. I'd paid for it. Every flower, every plate, every string light hanging from the crossbeams, all of it came from an account with my name on it. Dolores and Frank arrived at the reception like two people walking into a courtroom. They were quiet, careful. Dolores had reapplied her lipstick and was smiling a smile that looked like it had been installed by a surgeon. Frank was holding her elbow like she might bolt. They sat at their assigned table, front and center, because I'm not petty about seating charts. That's the thing people get wrong about me. I'm not vindictive. I don't punish people for sport. But I also don't pretend things didn't happen. The first hour went fine, toasts, dinner. My college roommate Priya gave a speech that made everyone laugh. Breedlove stood up and said 6 sentences, 3 about my father, 2 about me, 1 about Garrett, and sat down. That was his style, efficient. Then came the part Dolores wasn't expecting. During the break between dinner and cake, Ricky handed me a folder. I'd asked her to hold it because my dress didn't have pockets and I wasn't carrying a purse at my own wedding. Inside the folder were 3 documents. The first was a revised trust amendment. The Breedlove Family Trust had been restructured 6 months earlier, at my request, with Breedlove's approval, to include a specific provision: any future grandchildren of mine would be direct beneficiaries of a subtrust funded at $25 million at birth. The provision had a condition: the Trust's advisory board, which included me, Breedlove, and our family attorney, Roland Nettles, retained full discretion over distributions, and any individual deemed by the board to have engaged in conduct materially adverse to the welfare or dignity of a beneficiary could be permanently excluded from any advisory or fiduciary role. In plain language, if you publicly humiliated me or my child, you didn't get a seat at the table, ever. The second document was a postnuptial framework. Not a prenup. Garrett and I had already signed a prenup months ago, quietly, because we're both adults who understand how money works. This was different. This was a postnuptial addendum that specifically addressed the role of extended family in our household. It outlined, in crisp legal language, that any family member who engaged in documented hostility, defamation, or interference in our marriage would be subject to a formal no-contact order, enforceable through family court, with immediate effect. The third document was a letter, from me, addressed to Dolores and Frank. I'd written it 2 weeks earlier, on a Tuesday night, sitting at my kitchen table with a glass of milk and a pen. Handwritten. 2 pages. I'd written it because I believe that before you close a door you should tell someone exactly why it's closing. The letter was simple. It said, "I've been patient. I've been polite. I've sat at your table and smiled when you insulted me. I've watched you treat me like a stain on your family's name without ever asking who I am. Today you did it in front of 67 people at my wedding, in front of my godfather, in front of the man I love, in front of my daughter, who isn't born yet but who will one day hear about this, because people remember things like this. So here's what happens now. You will receive no further invitations to our home. You will not be present at the birth of our child. Any future contact will be initiated by Garrett on his terms in a setting of his choosing. If you attempt to contact me directly, by phone, email, text, social media, or through a third party, my attorney will respond on my behalf. This is not a punishment. This is a boundary. You had 18 months to treat me like a person. You chose not to. That choice has consequences. I didn't deliver the letter at the reception. I'm not a performer. I'm not Dolores." I handed the folder to Garrett while we were standing near the bar waiting for the cake to be brought out. He opened it. Read each document. His face didn't change much. Garrett's a soldier, he keeps his composure, but his jaw tightened on the second page of the letter, and when he finished, he closed the folder and looked at me. "You wrote this 2 weeks ago?" I wrote it the night you told me she was planning something. He nodded, slowly. Roland drew up the postnup? Roland and his partner, yes. It's already notarized. You just need to co-sign if you agree. And the trust amendment? Already executed. Breedlove signed it in March. Garrett looked across the room at his mother, who was sitting at her table with a glass of wine she wasn't drinking, staring at the floral centerpiece like it owed her money. Frank was talking to someone at the next table, his body language screaming, "Please don't bring it up." "She's going to say you planned this," Garrett said. "I did plan it." "She's going to say you manipulated me. She can say whatever she wants to her lawyer." Garrett was quiet for a moment. Then he set the folder on the bar, pulled out a pen from his jacket pocket, because Garrett always carries a pen, it's an army thing, and signed the postnuptial addendum on the last page. "I should have done this a year ago," he said. "You weren't ready a year ago." "No, I wasn't." He handed me the folder. I handed it to Ricky, who slid it into her bag with the efficiency of someone who'd been briefed. The rest of the reception unfolded normally. We cut the cake, we danced. Garrett spun me carefully because he was terrified of bumping the baby. The band played Van Morrison and everybody swayed, and for about 90 minutes it was a wedding, a real one, with love in it and laughter, and Breedlove doing a waltz with Lenora that made the entire room stop and watch because the man moved like he was 25. Dolores and Frank left at 9. They didn't say goodbye. They didn't approach us. Frank waved vaguely in Garrett's direction from across the room and steered Dolores toward the exit. She walked out the same way she'd walked in, chin up, spine straight, performing composure like it was a competitive sport. The letter was delivered to their home the following Monday by courier. Roland Nettles' office sent a separate copy via certified mail along with a formal notice of the no-contact provisions. What happened after that was predictable, because Dolores was predictable. First, she called Garrett, 7 times in 2 days. He answered once. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. He told her the boundary stood. She told him I was controlling him. He said, "Mom, she paid for the wedding, and you called her charity. We're done discussing this." She hung up. Then she called Frank's attorney, a man named Dwight Hooper who handled their estate planning, and asked him to review the situation. Dwight, to his credit, called Roland Nettles, got a 30-minute briefing on the trust structure, the postnup, and the legal exposure Dolores had created by publicly defaming me at a recorded event, and then called Dolores back and told her, in the politest possible terms, that she should refrain from further action. She didn't listen. She wrote a letter. Not to me, to Breedlove. I know this because Roland received a copy. The letter was 5 pages. It accused me of being a gold digger who had deceived her son. It called Breedlove's intervention at the wedding an abuse of military authority, which is legally meaningless but dramatically satisfying to write, I'm sure. It demanded that the trust amendment be reversed, and that I be evaluated for financial manipulation. Breedlove read the letter on a Thursday morning. He told me about it on a Thursday evening, over the phone, while I was lying on the couch with my feet up and the baby doing somersaults. "This woman," he said, "sent a 5-page letter to a 3-star general accusing his goddaughter of fraud, on stationery with her initials monogrammed in gold." "What are you going to do?" "Nothing. Roland will send a response. 1 paragraph. I've already approved the language." The response, which I later saw a copy of, read, "General Breedlove has reviewed your correspondence dated. The provisions of the Breedlove Family Trust are not subject to external review or modification based on personal grievance. Any further correspondence regarding trust matters should be directed to this office. This matter is closed." 9 sentences, 63 words. That was the last time Dolores Whitfield communicated with anyone in my family. Our daughter was born 3 weeks later, Emery Warren Whitfield. 7 pounds 4 ounces, Garrett cried. Breedlove showed up at the hospital in a sport coat and held her like she was made of glass. Lenora brought a hand-knitted blanket she'd been working on for months. Dolores was not there. Frank was not there. No one called them. No one informed them. They learned about the birth from a Facebook post that Priya shared 4 days later. A photo of Garrett holding Emery in the hospital, both of them asleep in the recliner, sunlight cutting through the blinds. Dolores commented on the photo. 1 word, "Congratulations." Priya deleted it. 3 months after Emery was born, Garrett and I moved into a house I'd purchased in a gated community outside Savannah. 4 bedrooms, a yard, a home office for me, a workshop for Garrett. Emery's nursery had hand-painted walls, a mural of the Georgia coast at sunset that Lenora had commissioned from an artist friend. Dolores and Frank lived 11 miles away. They might as well have lived on Mars. The sub-trust was funded the week Emery was born. $25 million, held in Emery's name, managed by the advisory board. Dolores's name appeared nowhere in the documents, neither did Frank's. The board consisted of me, Breedlove, Roland Nettles, and a financial advisor named Celeste Park, who'd been managing Breedlove's portfolio for 15 years. Garrett visited his parents once, about 4 months after the wedding. He went alone. He was there for an hour. When he came back, he said his mother had asked if the situation could be revisited. What did you tell her? I told her the situation was that she called my wife Charity at our wedding, and that's not something you revisit, that's something you live with. And? She cried. Dad stared at the table. I left. That was the last visit. It's not lost on me that this entire thing could have been avoided. If Dolores had asked me one question, one single question about my life, my work, my family, at any point in 18 months, none of this would have happened. Not because knowing about the money would have made her treat me better, but because asking would have meant she saw me as a person. She didn't. She saw a barefoot pregnant woman at an altar and decided she already knew the whole story. She was wrong. And now she sits 11 miles away in a house that costs less than my daughter's nursery mural, wondering how she lost access to her only grandchild, her only son, and any seat at any table that matters. The answer is simple. She grabbed a microphone, and a general stood up,